We're making chicken soup today. Chicken noodle soup. So I'm Karen Kennedy with Real Food Matters. And just the other day, I stopped by my mom's house just on an errand, and it was lunchtime. I wasn't planning on having lunch there, but she had just finished making chicken noodle soup. And I just forget how much I love plain old chicken noodle soup. And, I talk to a lot of people and they don't know how to make soup. Like, soup is a mystery dish for them. And this, honestly, chicken noodle soup is one of the easiest things. I know I say that a lot, but it is. It's really simple, and I want to show you how to do it. So, I'm going to show you, this is kind of the long way. I'm going to show you the long way, but you know how I always try to give you the shortcuts? I'll put some shortcuts in there because sometimes you have everything you need for a homemade chicken noodle soup with all the homemades. And sometimes you just want chicken noodle soup and you've got some shortcuts, and there's a place for all of that. So I'm going to start this soup with onions, carrots, and celery, the Trinity. So I heated up my pot, my same old Dutch oven that I use for everything. Any pan with a nice heavy bottom so you don't burn things. But it's hot. I just put some olive oil in it, and I cut up an onion. I'm going to saute that with some salt, because remember that water follows the salt. The salt helps it break down. Now, on timing with this, so right now it's about 1:30 in the afternoon. This is often when I like, because I'm working from home. I didn't feel like I had time today, but when I was having lunch, and I was making lunch for me and the kids, I was scrambling some eggs. And while I was waiting for my pan to heat up, I came over here and I just chopped up that onion, and I chopped up some carrots and celery. That is the kind of like midday prep you can do, and you can do it when you plan. Like just even one day ahead planning, but ideally a couple of days ahead. You can just sketch out, I'm going to be busy this day right at dinner time, or I'll be busy in the morning, and you know what kind of food that you'll have time to make. But just being able to prep vegetables ahead of time and get the soup started makes the biggest difference. I learned that when I had kids, when I had babies who were napping. Because as a childless person, I could just say, oh, we're going to have dinner around 6 or 7, so I'll start making dinner around 5. But when you have babies, that time of the evening is so busy and so stressful, and everybody needs you, and you don't have time. And that's when I learned to make use of the little gaps in my schedule during the day. So that for me, I'm in the kitchen already at lunchtime getting some food, and so I just take an extra 5 minutes to prep some vegetables and get something on. So I did this. This is extra. So it's here. All right, so those are sauteing, and then I'm going to throw my carrots and celery in, and some herbs. And you can use just thyme. You can use Italian seasoning. Sometimes I just use some sprigs of. I'm just going to put thyme in here. I'm going to put some, and I'm going to put it in a little bit later because I have some fresh thyme outside. But I was going to say I would use herbes de Provence, or I would just use some dried thyme in here and a bay leaf. But I think I'm going to go cut some thyme. So I put those veggies in, and I put some more salt in there to break it down. And then I'm going to let these saute for a few minutes. Okay, so my onions, carrots, and celery are soft, but I want them to cook a little bit longer. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the fat off the chicken broth. So I cooked a chicken carcass, and now I've got some broth under here. So when you cook your chicken carcass, you can see I've got a stock pot here. This is a different batch of broth, but I had another couple of chicken carcasses to cook down. You strain it out, strain out the solids, and then you put it into a container like this and put it in the refrigerator. And while it's in the fridge, the fat will rise to the top and it'll harden, and then you can take it off. So, see how I can just take it off almost like a sheet. And do you see how yellow this fat is? This doesn't happen very often. Last weekend, I happened to go over to a friend's house down the road because she had raised some meat chickens and she needed help processing them for the freezer. And so I helped her with that. And this is from the carcass of one of those. And when your chickens eat grass, the fat has some of those carotenes in them and it turns it yellow, just like, you know, your chickens, if they eat grass, they'll have those bright yellow egg yolks. That's what you have. And if you want, you can use this for cooking fat. I think I'm going to feed it to my chickens. All right, so this is going to be my broth. And oh, look at that. It's nice and thick. Depending on how much broth you have and how you want your soup, I might use all of this broth for my soup and make a nice big pot of soup, but this is pretty concentrated. What I often do is I'll use maybe a third or a fourth of this in a soup and dilute it with water, and then I can save it all, divide it up into a couple of different pots and put it in the freezer so that I always have a little bit of chicken broth for things. Right. Okay. So my veggies look good. I'm going to bring you over here. Oh, can I? Yes. So those look really good. Now I'm going to add my garlic. I chopped up a couple cloves of garlic because remember, you don't want to overcook your garlic because it'll burn, and you want all those aromatics to stay in your soup and not evaporate. And I'm going to add some thyme. This is a bit overdone, but I had fresh thyme growing in the garden, and some bay leaves. I always use a couple of bay leaves, you know, not just one bay leaf. I try to use like 2 or 3 to actually get some flavor. And now what I'm going to add is I'm going to add a quart of tomatoes, and you can use a little bit less if you want. My mom always says she uses her small quarts for this, or a pint. You don't have to add tomatoes to your chicken noodle soup. That's just a preference thing. But I like a little bit of tomato. And I'm going to add, I'm just going to be really greedy because I have a lot of chicken broth right now. I'm going to put in all the chicken broth. It's going to be so good. And that's the main part of my soup. That's it. I'm going to let this come to a boil. I'm going to turn it down to a simmer, and I'm just going to let this cook this afternoon while I go back to work. And in the meantime, the other ingredients that are going to go in there for later are, and I'll come back and finish this video, you can put any noodles you want. You can use gluten-free pasta. You can use spaghetti and break it up. My mom always gets these noodles at Winco in bulk, and she always shares them with me, so I'm going to use them. I think the best. They're kind of like a linguine, and we break them up into smaller pieces because, as my mom says, she doesn't want to be slurping a noodle and have it smack her in the face. So I like those. Sometimes I put greens in at the end, so we'll see. Sometimes I put some fresh basil in at the end, and I have some. But the other one is chicken. So this is where I would make the soup, and if I've cooked a chicken recently, I might have some extra breast or thigh meat that I put in here. But what I'm going to do next is, this was 3 chicken carcasses that I cooked down to make the broth that I need to put in the fridge today. And this is all that's left from them. So a couple things to note. The bones, you know, they just break. They break with your fingers. They just crumble because the minerals that make your bones hard got sucked out into the broth. Super high in calcium, super high in all of the minerals needed to make bones, make your bones. So that's why bone broth is such a great bone food, you know, for women, anybody who cares about their bone density. But there's a lot of meat here, and it's not the kind of meat that's going to be awesome, you know, by itself, but it's perfect for soup. So I'm just going to spend some time as this cools. I'm going to pick off this and just start throwing it in the pot later on. So I'm going to hit pause, and I'll come back when it's time to finish up. Okay, so let's see how we're doing. So we started this just after lunch, remember? And now, you know, it's about an hour before I want to eat dinner. But you could start this step a half an hour before you want to eat dinner. So that's given me, you know, the whole afternoon to just work. You know, we spent what, 10 minutes getting this on? And I said I was going to give you a couple shortcuts. So I'm going to show you the rest of this, and I'll give you some good shortcuts. So in that amount of time has been, can you see this? This orangey color from the tomatoes and the chicken broth and carrots and celery. So the vegetables are really nicely cooked now. The flavors have kind of developed. And so now I'm going to add the meat and the noodles. So I picked off a bunch of meat from the chicken, and I'm going to add that now. And that's just to heat it. And I'm also going to add some noodles. Now there's always, it is possible to add too many noodles. So you go from soup to stew very quickly because there's a tendency to add too many noodles to this. So I'm just going to add a few handfuls. And then this is also when you might add some greens. If you want to add some Swiss chard or some kale, I would chop that up really small and add it. I think I just picked some fresh basil. I'm going to add this at the very end because those fresh herbs you don't want to overcook. If you want the basil taste and you don't have fresh basil, you can always put a teaspoon of pesto in there, either canned pesto or frozen, you know, pureed basil. So I'm bringing this back up to a boil. I'll let it come to a boil and then simmer for about 10 minutes and then it's done. But you can also let this sit and the noodles will just get more and more moist and a little more mushy, and I kind of like that. So, shortcuts. First shortcut is instead of getting whole raw chickens, you can get rotisserie chickens. Now I find, you know, of course, I would like you to buy the best quality meat you can afford. Pastured chicken is always going to be better for you in the environment, but here's the thing, that's not always possible, and that doesn't, you know, there's always a continuum. So what about popping into your Costco or your Chuck's and getting that rotisserie chicken that's all ready, especially when you need something quick. Maybe you have a little bit of that chicken for your dinner one night, and then always, while it's warm, pick the meat off that carcass of your chicken, and then throw that carcass in to make some stock, and the chicken that you pick off, you can use it then and there, but if you want to save it for your soup, you can put it in the fridge or even in the freezer until you're ready to use it for soup. So that's one thing. The other one is you can just, okay, so that's one, and then you make your soup. The other one is you buy chicken broth. You just get the box. I like the Pacific Foods chicken broth, and I always add some unflavored gelatin to that, or collagen powder, or, you know, gelatin, something like that, to increase the protein. Just, it's good. It makes your soup taste better and more nutritious. And I've talked about that before. And then you can just use chicken. I use chicken leg portions for your meat. I think that works great. Yeah, so those are all the different kind of things you can do. You can use any kind of noodle you like, egg noodles, or pasta, gluten-free noodles. Yeah, but that is your chicken soup. I'll show you a bowl of it when it's all done, but it's super. This just did not take me that much time today, and everybody loves this soup. Okay, it's about dinner time. Here's our soup. And I've got some fresh, now, so basil, you don't usually put basil and chicken noodle soup, but I do, so you don't have to. But I'm going to put that in just, you know, just at the last minute here. Okay. So, here it is. So you saw I didn't put a ton of meat in there, but it seems really meaty anyways. So I cut my carrots nice and big, because I think nice big chunks of carrots give it such a good texture. And there's my thyme stick. Isn't that great? I think I'm going to grate a little Parmesan cheese on top of it and serve that. So I hope this gives you the confidence to make some chicken noodle soup on your own. Don't be afraid to go all out and start with a whole chicken and, you know, learn how to use the whole animal like this. But also don't feel bad about taking the shortcuts, because sometimes it's at night for using the whole chicken, and sometimes you just got to get something on the table and use what you have in the pantry. Just make some soup. Thanks for watching. Bye.